Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Planning Commission for July 24th. Let's have a roll call.
Commissioner Hawley?
Here.
Commissioner Chorin?
Here.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer?
Here.
Commissioner Mason?
Here.
Commissioner Lemke?
Here.
Commissioner Parrish?
Here.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer?
Here.
Alderman Worth?
Here.
Mayor Ebentroth.
Here. We have a quorum. And the first item is approval of the minutes of June 24th.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. The consent agenda includes a public hearing for Concord 22 LLC. Applicant is seeking conditional use grant approval to operate a 1,650 square foot fitness center for the property located at 11521 North Port Washington Road.
Move to go to public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Does anybody wish to speak to this item?
Move to
Fitness
close the
center.
public hearing.
Second.
Motion second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Regular business under consent, Metropolitan Builders Association. The applicant is seeking minor request for temporary use approval between August 6th and September 6th for directional signs for the 2017 Parade of Homes, which is located in the Highlander Estates subdivision. Any questions or concerns about that? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I did have a question.
Okay.
Staff had recommended something other than what the Metropolitan Builders Association had requested. Are they comfortable and in agreement with what you're recommending?
They are comfortable, and they did not even feel the need to come to the meeting.
Okay. I wanted to ask.
All right.
Move to approve the consent agenda per staff's recommendation.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The consent agenda is done with. Regular business, signs now, Milwaukee for Yamato. The applicant is seeking sign approval to use polystyrene foam for a monument sign for the property located at 6300 West Eastbrook Court. This is in the Mequon Business Park.
So the applicant is proposing to install this freestanding sign made out of the polystyrene foam material. This is a material that staff has not approved in the past and one that has not been approved by staff for the business park. The sign does meet all technical requirements, but because of the material, we're bringing it to the Planning Commission. The base of the sign will also be made out of the same material. It will be made or carved to match the block material of the building, but it will still be the polystyrene material. This is cost-effective and one that the applicant believes will withstand the winter, and that's why they're proposing this type of material.
You guys want to sit at the table?
Oh, the table.
And
No problem.
tell us about your sign.
I wasn't sure how familiar everybody is or is not with the material being proposed and how long it's been around. So I brought a sample of the material. We call it a hammer sample, so you can see what it's like and feel it. I even brought a hammer. You can beat it if you want to know if it's destructible or not on here. But it's from our end of it, it's a material that's been around for many years. It seems to be far more durable and better product, lasts longer, looks nicer for many, many years as opposed to stones or landscape materials and things that can shift with frost and heat, since this is a single piece construction. I brought several photos. I can show you other examples of signs that are out there too with us that we've done using this exact same material. The proposal would be is that the sign, when it's done, it's going to be manufactured like it looks on that photo up there. That would be using a design style on the base to take the look of the stones that are already used in the existing product on the building itself. If you'd like to look at the material, I'd be happy to pass it around.
Could you please?
Sure. What it's like, this does not show you the color or anything else, it's just meant to show the actual material.
Here, hold that.
Where they've been actually hit by a car and put a dent in the car as opposed to the sign, so.
It seems very light. I mean, is there any way that it would move or the wind would, like, what if we get really, really
Well,
good?
it's secured, you bore down into the ground, below the frost line, you pour footings in there. It's got solid pipes that go down into that aspect of it to hold it in place. So there's no movement in all these agendas.
Take a whack at it?
Sure, set it down.
Wow.
Meeting in order, huh?
If you did that with a rock, you'd crack it.
Mayor? I guess I don't have any particular issue with the durability, but I'm concerned about the look. I mean, you know, you say you can match the stone.
Sure, I can bring,
I'm
I've got
I'm
some,
questioning that. And we're also then setting a precedence, aren't we?
I would say to some extent, I mean, the only one that I could recall us approving in the past was an after-effect approval for the Huntington Park subdivision. I believe the mayor was maybe here at the time, but they used a similar material, but they did install them without a permit and approval, and they were basically asking for an after-the-fact approval. That's the only one I can recall that we approved that type of material, especially for the base.
So,
Where was that?
The Huntington Park subdivision signs?
Okay. Alderman Worth.
I did, because I was concerned about this, went around and I found another location out on the west side with it, and the sign looked, now it may not be the same polystyrene, but it looked kind of old and used and beat up. I called a sign guy, the guy I bought my last 2 signs from, and which would meet the Mequon requirements. And, you know, his argument against it is, it does look good when it's first put up, but if birds peck on it, you know, it tends to break, and once you do that, it doesn't maintain, it doesn't last as well. Now, that's a guy who doesn't sell it, so you know, just like you're a guy who does sell it, I'm not sure how to.
there's different types of polystyrene. There used to be a style of material that's a foam sign in there, and they'd basically paint the foam, and you are correct, birds love that. You'll even see that with letters on the sides of buildings. But if you'll see the sample that went around in there, this is an encapsulated product. It's a lot different than just a styrene sign that's out there. So I've got some photographs passing around that's just to show you the capabilities of what it can look like on some of the other types of signs that have been done in here. Or they're all foam signs that are in those photographs, just so you know.
It would have been nice if you would have brought something that looked like the stone or the brick to,
I'm sorry, I just didn't have a physical
Here,
sample
pass
other
it.
than my hammer sample to bring, to show it to you. I apologize.
So this stone is polystyrene?
All those photos there are polystyrene. Those are all, every one of these things are made by hand and painted by hand and encapsulated.
And
Actually look pretty
our
good.
code requires the base of the sign
The base of the sign
to match
specifically.
the materials of the building
correct.
to the greatest extent possible. And
Now, is
what's-
that internally lit or,
No, there's no internal lighting in this.
okay.
No lighting at all?
I think we have external
There's
lighting plan, right?
There'd be an external light pointing up at it on here, but it's pointing toward the building away from the street, so there's no internal illumination in the sign itself.
Okay.
is that in the materials?
Excuse me?
Is the lighting in the materials and any requirements as far as or landscaping requirements or what have you? If we approve this, are we approving the lighting tonight also?
No, they're specifically asking for the material for the signage. Our typical permit will state that they have to have a landscaping bed around the signage, and any illumination would have to be approved by staff as well. We have lighting code requirements for signage. But this is a specific request just to use this type of material for the signage.
So they could use a stone base and then have a polystyrene sign
That would be an option.
on top of it. Mr. Shaver?
I would agree with Commissioner Chora in that I don't like the idea of imitation stone. It pretty much looks like what it is. And I think I might be amenable to using the polystyrene on the sign itself, but not on the base. I think that should be real stone.
Mr. Schaefer?
I have 2 questions. It says on the sheet, on the page in front of me and the one that Jack has up, it says illuminated LED monument sign. So is it lit or is it not?
I'm sorry, that is a typo. That was, if it's going to be illuminated, it would be an exterior light pointing up
Okay.
at it. It's not exterior.
I actually only noticed it right after you said it wasn't going to be, so.
I
And then-
apologize. That was a previous earlier proposal that never got up to this point.
Fair enough, just clarifying. And then for these pictures, sorry to eating this, the stone on all these pictures is real stone and it's the sign.
None of those is real stone.
The stone is all this.
All
this
those,
type.
all of that is the exact same material, the complete sign itself on every one of them. I would defy you to tell the difference between them and the real things.
No, I certainly.
Other,
can't by
other than if
looking-
you walked right up to it and was a foot away from it and touching it or something like that.
I can't by looking at these pictures tell brand new signs, but I would defer to our architects.
Mr. Parrish?
Thanks for your application. I think it's a reputable sign company and a reputable manufacturer. They're in the back of the court. I would be okay approving what's being presented, and as long as it stays, to this level. And by all means, if it were to deteriorate in any way, shape, or form, as far as, birds eating away it or cars hitting it or things of that nature, such that it would, affect the image of the park in any way, or create a slippery slope that would suggest that other signs could be of inferior quality, that would be unacceptable. But as far as what I'm seeing here, this looks like a quality sign, and I would be okay with it. Per staff's recommendations.
Well, I guess I'd be concerned of somewhat of a shift in policy that we'd be looking at. I mean, there's no justification for not using real stone in this case. I mean, they can get stone to match the building. I think there's the choice being made here is an economical one. So if we are going to look at potentially allowing this type of sign, I think we should then look at it to see whether that's something we want to approve citywide and go down that path. And so I guess it somewhat does set a bit of a precedent going forward. So I think we should keep that in mind when we make a decision on the materials.
I'm just curious a little bit, what's the requirement as far as the base compared to the facade of a building? So within the industrial park, I see signs, some of them are really brand new, where the base is wrapped aluminum. It's not, and that building has a stone facade. So if there's a requirement that the base of a sign match the facade of a building, I don't see that happening. There's a brand new sign that went up right across the street from our building within the last year that has a wrapped aluminum base.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's a precedent or not.
I'm not, obviously I'm not sure what sign you're referring to and whether it had a base already. I mean, typically we want to see materials that are consistent with the building materials on the base of the sign. I don't know, again, what specific sign you're talking about.
It's the other sign on Eastwood Court.
Yeah, it depends on what the material is. If the building has no brick or no stone on it, then we'll look at other complementary materials, things like that.
Yeah.
I'd have to get more information before I can understand what was
That
approved at that.
particular building, I'm familiar with it on there. That particular building is identical in the material composition to this building on there, yet that particular sign does not have any look or comparability to that.
Yeah, again, I don't know the sign itself. It may have been put up without permits for all I know. I don't really know the history of it, sorry.
If you drive around the community and look at the signs in front of buildings, and I never noticed this till a few years ago, but they do tend to look a lot like the materials that are in the building. So Metro Market is kind of silver. If you have a red brick building, you could have red brick, et cetera. Not all of them are that way, but the majority are. But what you don't know is, you don't know if the brick is actually brick or fake brick. It just looks like the building in most cases. So it's probably not a hard and fast rule. I think it's more visual than maybe it is the construction materials themselves. Just an observation. Alderman Worth.
I normally err a little bit on the side of letting the applicant, if it doesn't offend me, do what they're looking to do. On the other hand, I looked at the ordinance, and it's pretty clear, what it says. It's supposed to be the same material if that's possible. I also do think it's a pretty significant policy change. I thought the sign code was overdone when we did it, but it is a requirement of the sign code. So I guess I'm a little concerned about if we agree to this, the next guy comes and says, but I want to do this different than what it says. I think it ought to be we ought to have good policies in our code and then live by the good policies in our code unless somebody can demonstrate a hardship or an impossibility or what have you. I think this is a fairly significant, well, it's black and white in the code, and yet we're going to deviate from it without even having an example of that material to look at. I'd be happy to table this, address a sign code amendment with examples and look at it and see if it works, but I'm not sure we should do it on the fly based on some photographs. Because I think we should be consistent in how we treat applicants. I talked to 2 developers today also, and they said, well, I never could have gotten away with that. It ought to be a level playing field. I drove through the business park. In fact, I drove by your building on my way here. Didn't happen to notice a sign across from you, but noticed that most of the new signs have stone bases, including the city's own new sign that's right around the corner from your building, which meets the sign code. We didn't exempt ourselves from those requirements. The city didn't. I think if we're going to change the rules, we ought to look at the rule and determine how we should change it before we do it on the fly.
Question. If he brought in a sample of the stone, would that change your mind? First question. Second, if we decided that we wanted the base to match the building, but then have this product as the sign above the base, would you be receptive to that?
I'm not sure technically what the sign code says about the product above the base. I might be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't really address it. I think that the applicant's right in a sense that we've come a long way with some of the technology. So I think that's something we're going to have to vet out over the years on how durable that type of product is for the upper part of the sign. It hasn't been common in the past. We haven't seen a lot of it for the upper portions of sign faces, but it may be something that is a suitable product. I think there is a distinction though between that and the actual base and emulating the look of the stone.
But if the base looked decent, then I might advocate for changing the
then we would have to
text
look
of the
at it.
ordinance
Yeah.
to allow for it. But the ordinance right now says it's not allowed.
Yeah, I understand.
Mr. Mason.
I have a question for the applicant. Do you have any statistics on how long the material lasts? It probably doesn't last as long as stone, but will it break down with UV rays from the sun and rain and weather and wind? What's the life expectancy?
I don't have statistics to show you. I can tell you that this material has existed and been in use, this particular exact base material, for over 20 years. It's been down in Florida, California, New England. It stands test of time with sun in Arizona. It hasn't had any problems with it, but I don't have any hard facts. I could tell you exactly how long everything has been there. I just know from our manufacturing perspective where they've been used and how long they've been in product in existence.
And how long is that it's been used in existence?
For a little over 20 years.
20 years, okay. I agree, though, with the alderman. I think we shouldn't be changing sign ordinances in this meeting, and we really should go through a sign ordinance review if we're going to change that, because a lot of people have come in front of us over the past years and signs are always an issue, and now they've had to go probably purchase a more expensive sign. Now we're going to change it. I don't think we should just do it on the fly.
I guess one suggestion could be if you, it sounds like there may be support to approve the base as stone and the upper portion as the polystyrene. And if the applicant feels, again, that that's still not the preferable option, we can look at potentially making some code modifications to the sign code and bringing them back in front of you. That's just going to be a longer process, and I guess it comes down to how long the applicant wants to wait before the sign is installed, because the sign code change is going to be at least a 2 to 3 month process.
We'd have to see examples.
Right. But if you wanted to, in the meantime, give him the option to have an approved sign with a stone base and let them go forward at that point if they decide to go that route.
And if they were to come back, I'd also want some locations in similar buildings, find where there's actually signs so that maybe somebody could go look at them.
Right, I think we would, and as staff would want to go investigate what some of these signs look like up close and see what kind of durability and longevity they have to them, so.
I'd move to approve the sign with a natural base and the polystyrene top, with and I know our code requires this anyhow, but a specific provision in the approval saying that if the polystyrene degrades or disintegrates, or I don't know the appropriate language, but that the city may require of them to replace it
Over what period of time?
whenever it degrades or
I guess I couldn't agree to do that as a sign company in perpetuity. I mean, you come back to me 100 years from now, I couldn't do that.
well, it's not the sign company, it's the owner of the building that would have to replace their panel if it no longer is in an appropriate condition.
I'd like to
And
second that
we can
motion.
accept that
That's a good motion.
contingency, that's fine.
Second.
That'd fall under-
That's
Do
ours.
you have a second?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, natural base polystyrene for the rest of it. Any further comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't forget your hammer and your.
It was sturdier than I thought it was going to be.
Pardon?
It was sturdier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah? Good. Might be able to make houses out of it.
That's an interesting idea.
Moving on. Mike Maida, the applicant is seeking master sign plan approval for the property at 10400 to 10412 North Bear Road.
So this property is also located in the business park. It is zone B5. For B5 multi-tenant buildings, a master sign plan is required if they want more than one wall sign. The signs are also subject to the criteria listed in your report. This applicant has come forward with this master sign plan proposal that would allow one tenant, one sign for the building. Unless the tenant occupies more than one unit, they would be allowed that number of signage. In addition, the floor plan and elevation that you were provided shows 7 tenant spaces, but 9 wall signs. And speaking with the architect, the 9 wall signs are to allow for an ultimate build-out of the property. So the 2 southernmost buildings could be divided into more tenant spaces. So they're showing 9 signs in case those are divided in the future. However, staff only support 7 signs since that is what is being shown. And we only support 1 sign per tenant. We think that is sufficient signage for the building. The materials that are being proposed is aluminum material with a polyethylene core, and you guys have an example of that in you should have an example of that in your packet, a sign that would meet all the requirements, 30 square foot, and then the black dark background with the white lettering placed in a location above the tenant space. Staff is not in support of the dark black background. We feel that it doesn't really meet the criteria C, which is that the sign should relate to the architectural features of a building. We're willing to work with the applicant to come to a consensus on what is fitting for the building.
Is the applicant here? No? Okay, so
Doesn't offend me.
a master sign plan, and you're recommending a maximum of 7 signs, 1 per tenant. If they add more tenants, of course, they can always ask for more signs, right?
Correct.
And the one sign that's being proposed for CrossFit, you don't like the black.
Well, there's a couple issues, I think, and this process was all, I think, driven by the tenant. And once they were told that since it's a multi-tenant building in the B5, they would have to submit a master sign plan. The owner of the building was involved and who got their architect involved. But I think they were gearing this sign plan to fit what the tenant was looking for in terms of their signage. We had several conversations with the tenant with regard to the sign. In addition to this, the color of the sign, again, this is a rather economical sign. It's basically kind of like a dye bond. It's basically only about 3 inches in thickness, and the lettering on it isn't raised, so it's a relatively flat kind of a sign. It won't have a lot of projection on that building. We don't have a lot of examples of this type of sign. There are a couple that we've approved in the past, the commission, I believe. The Joy Gerard's wall sign above the awning and the Hallman Lindsay, I believe, was approved by the commission with that similar kind of sign. And I think if you can recall those signs, the Hallman Lindsay, it's a relatively flat kind of a sign. So we just feel like a little bit more of dimension on this sign would be applicable in this area as well. Again, the black, we do have some pictures of the building facade. They probably won't come out very well on the projector. It's a lot better on the screen than what you can see out there. But the original sign color you can see is like a burgundy background with a tannish interior on this sign. It was replaced at one point to a black background, so there is some consistency with the black. But the overall building itself is, again, it's a masonry building. There's some burgundy tones to it, things like that. Again, doesn't come through very well on the screen. So I guess we're just looking for some direction. It's been somewhat difficult to have a discussion because the main party of interest is the tenant, and where we're dealing with the owner who doesn't really have much of a concern. She doesn't feel that there's any other tenants in the building that have expressed interest in putting up a sign. So she's basically at this point stating that, well, if that's what the tenant wants, we're willing to go that route. But the issue is, again, we're going to be setting a precedent going forward that once this sign is up, all the other signs that would go up in the future are going to have to be similar in terms of the style and design of the sign. So,
Okay, so you don't want all of them looking this way?
no.
Okay. Any comments from commissioners? I would move approval of the master sign plan based on staff comments.
Second.
Exactly the way you've laid it out.
Second.
Motion and a second.
I have one comment, although I kind of thought in the picture the sign looked fine. But the concern I have is, I think in your, I'd have to find it here, but somewhere you said that you want on the 2 end units, the sign centered somewhat. Yet I think there are 2 fairly large expanses that if you put I mean, I agree that there should only be 7 signs. But rather than forcing them to move the signs, if you subdivide those individual spaces, it seemed, the sign on the right is a big expanse, and the sign on the left comes out further. It might look fine with an individual sign in those individual places, so that if they were to divide the space, they wouldn't have to subsequently move signage, which tends to often look awful on a building anyhow.
And we spent a long period of time trying to analyze these signs and where they would go and projecting on what could be split in the future. It was a time-consuming effort, and again, that's something I think we can finally tweak some of those issues, because we've had numerous discussions, and I don't know what the architect basically said. I figured I would just show them just in case they do decide to, so they don't have to come back for a future amendment if those 10 spaces are split. So I think we can work on the 7 that are proposed and balance those as well as we can. Again, if only 1 or 2 get installed, we still have some issues out there in terms of how it's going to look. But That's kind of the nature of the ordinance. I mean, for years, we didn't allow any wall signs in the B5 on multi-tenant buildings, and we did get a lot of feedback from some of the businesses in the community that they were not allowed signs, and so we tried to accommodate them by having this option and requiring a master sign plan so we can get a more holistic approach to the building, so. But there are definitely some fluxes with that in terms of when these signs get up and how many we'll see, and we can work with that and try to figure something out. I think that'll look good.
Any other comments? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion is adopted. Moving on to Joe and Marie Kelly. The applicant is seeking specimen tree removal approval to remove one red oak tree from the property at 13817 North Hillside Drive.
I do have the city forester here. This is, request is to remove, as you said, one oak tree. I do have the plan up on the screen that shows the location of the tree in relation to the addition. As you can see, it would be relatively tight to the foundation wall of the proposed addition. And so they're asking for removal of that tree. The city forester's recommendation is to not allow approval of the tree based on the tree preservation ordinance. If the commission does grant approval, there are conditions in there what the replacement value would be. In this case, it would be a $1,350 donation to the Mequon Tree Fund or the equivalent plantings on the site. So with that, staff does recommend denial, and again, the city forester is here to answer any questions regarding the tree.
Let me go to the applicant.
Well, I brought this tree in. With
Hey,
this-
Mr. Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, nice to meet you. When we first moved in, 2001, I put that tree there. So I'm just asking to get rid of it. I've also planted several other trees. I didn't give it, but I brought a plot, aerial of our property, and about half of these trees I planted. So I am a nature lover and I'm an outdoorsman. But this one tree grew too big, and I was unaware of the rule, or of that tree becoming an issue at some point. Right now, it's about 16 inches. I have a photo of that as well. It's like 16 in one section, 17 in another. I've already planted so many trees on the property, I don't even know where to put any more, but if that's what it is, I've got a field in the back that I cleared a bunch of buckthorn out. I could throw a couple more in there, but to me, it just, that tree that we put in shouldn't have been I should have never done it. You know, I'm regretting it now.
This garage addition was approved by the Board of Appeals.
Correct. He sought a variance to reduce the side yard setback and was approved by Board of Appeals.
Okay. And then question for the forester. If he didn't remove the tree, what would he do about expanding the garage?
If he didn't remove the tree, I believe the garage could be shifted back, but that's something that isn't obviously my expertise. I literally just took into account the health of the tree, and then basically, that's what the ordinances and policy is written like, is just taking into account the overall health of the tree, the canopy, and letting the planning commission take the steps to make the decision.
Our addition has gone back since 2006. We originally had a set of drawings that were verbally approved. They didn't have to, so we didn't have to go any further. We ended up doing one section of the addition, which is on the other side, not the garage. We already went through Board of Appeals on that. Then ever since then, it's been about, 18 months, we've been dealing with trying to put an addition on. It was approved, a 3-car garage was approved verbally in the appeals meeting. They said no. Then the paperwork came back saying we could. So I drew a 3-car garage. It was approved Then all of a sudden, the tree became an issue, and they pulled the 3-car garage, told me I could have 2, and we have letters stating all this. I'm at $20,000 right now on this print, and then the last thing to happen is a tree that I planted becomes an issue. Between my wife and I, we're done. She doesn't even want to come up here now. She doesn't want, because she'll start crying, and I'm done. We'll move. We already have looked at a lot of houses because this has taken, I mean, just imagine 2006 dealing with, well, it's been about 18 months of effort trying to put an addition on to improve a house that garage is not going to stand much longer. It's already rotten out now, so just leave it for the next people. Tree, I'm willing to plant more trees. It's not like I haven't planted half my yard. I love the yard. I love the location. But to have to pay a fine or something on those, we're not gonna do it. We'll move. The kids want to stay. I have a 12 and a 14-year-old. That's the only reason we came to the meeting. We already found a house we like, but they said they want to stay, so we figured we'd give it one more try. But to me, it's I guess a matter of principle. And I am a nature lover, and I don't want to see that tree go either. But I don't know. I have 10 other ones. Well, let's see, 6 red oak and 2 white oak that I planted in the yard. So that's what I'm asking, I guess, if I can take the tree down, plant a couple more.
That is an option.
Well, in my mind, this is one of the really injustices in our tree code ordinance. If you planted the tree yourself, and then to have somebody tell you you have to leave the tree in that you planted your own property, I find that to be, just obnoxious. I know the tree board is looking at some modifications. I hope this is one of them that they make, that a house that's within the, at least the immediate perimeter of, a tree that's in the immediate perimeter of the house, that unless it was something that you were told you had to keep when you built the house, because we have sometimes that's the case.
I do have just one comment for that comment.
If I could finish, please.
Sure.
I think trees like this ought to be, it's your property. It doesn't belong to the neighborhood or the city or anybody else. It's not part of a forest. It's landscaping in an individual's private yard. And so I'm certainly going to vote for the waiver or the ability to remove the tree. Now, as far as and I agree with you, I think it's a fine, but the fee payment, I hope you plant other trees, because I find that also to be rather pernicious, that the city could require you to pay money to remove something that you invested in, you planted, you grew, and then the city wants you to pay them to allow you to take down your own property. That's just wrong.
But we give them a choice,
Yeah.
because some properties don't have any room for trees.
So then they ought to be able to take it down if they planted it.
Well,
And that's what I hope we change in the ordinance.
I might agree with that as well, but in this case, I
But
think,
it is a requirement, I know.
in this case, the issue of the trees should have come up a long time before the Board of Appeals said you could build a garage
Right.
where the tree is. So, I mean, it's kind of been a done deal. Mike?
There's a little bit of discrepancy on whether or not that the homeowner planted the tree. It is a diameter breast height of an 18-inch oak. I've got multiple different sources considering a growth factor of a red oak at a 4, which is, but DNR, the website of DNR from Minnesota, Morton Arboretum, and then a website, Living Urn, all have the same growth rate and growth factor that you would calculate your age for an oak tree. And it would put that oak tree at somewhere between 60 and 70 years old. So if he says he moved in 2001, that was my major discrepancy with, based
We
on.
have 2 photos of the tree.
We also took
after that,
took
when we
pictures
planted it.
or we took overhead views prior to, and have definitive pictures from back to like 1980 of the tree in that yard.
The
Which
tree
would
was put in with a
precede.
spade truck by me
Okay.
when we moved in.
Okay.
So that's, I mean, I'm not, sorry.
Yeah, that's-
It's irrelevant. It's
that's not
it's
fair.
Right.
personal property in somebody's yard.
Right.
We could walk through the property and I can show you all the trees that I planted. You can let me know roughly when they were. But I still planted them and I still will plant more. To me, it's, I don't know. Sure, to cut a tree down, I understand that there are certain trees that I wouldn't want to see come down either. This is one I wouldn't want to see come down, but it prohibits me from everything we've been working on and spending $20,000 on so far. So I see your point, but I think there you almost have to look at it from a couple different ways.
Mr. Lemke.
I couldn't say it any better, obnoxious. I mean, it's landscaping. I would go so far as to give him retroactive credit for the other trees he's already put in. I just don't, you can hear it. I mean, the guy's looking at other houses because of one tree in his yard, that even if it is 35, 40 years old instead of 10 years old, plant another one and 20 years from now, it's gonna be the same size. Definitely voting to allow the tree to come down.
Schaefer.
I have a question for the forester. If we denied it, when they dig the foundation, are they going to cut so many roots that it's going to die anyway?
Yeah, I mean, it's so close to the foundation of even the
Unless
existing
it's
garage.
moved a significant distance.
Yeah, it would have to be moved a significant distance.
I don't think, you can't move it too far or you won't have access to that second floor.
Correct. Yeah, and that's why it wasn't my recommendation to move. I mean, it was just my recommendation to deny the removal based on
Based
what
on
I
our
have
statutes.
in front of me as far as the policy and ordinance.
Okay.
So,
Just definitely in favor of granting the waiver tonight. And I don't know, I want to be respectful of, Pam's passing was so recent and such, but I was just thinking about Pam during reading the packet, and then we're talking about changes to the ordinance tonight, so I just wanted to, the reason why I want to grant a waiver to you is because you have demonstrated a hardship as far as your $20,000 investment in trying to get this passed, and because you planted it. And because of those two reasons, I would grant a waiver. So those would be criteria that I would suggest for the ordinance.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
All right. Is there a second to that?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Becky?
I don't want to pile on, but I typically do anyway. I would just, I think I would be cautious of bashing our our code and the things that are in place to preserve our trees. I think a lot of us live in Mequon for the reason that it is a little bit more rural and a little bit more green than a lot of the other areas. And I agree that it comes across, right? It comes across in your demeanor and in your letter. You guys have been through a lot, and clearly you're frustrated, and rightfully so. Doesn't mean that moving to another city, Mequon's not unique as far as the way that our governmental processes and everything work. So it probably feels like time to throw in the towel and get out, but I wouldn't do it just because of this issue. That's up to you. I would say I would certainly vote in favor of the waiver here, and I would be in favor of kind of like what Commissioner Lemke said. If there's already been enough planting on the property and it can be demonstrated that it was done, I don't know that we would need to go through the fine or the replanting. I guess
I cleared out probably about a half acre we have a yard, or a 3-acre lot. I cleared out a section in preparation of buckthorn, so I can plant another couple of trees. We can walk through the property, and I can walk and show them all the trees that we have planted in the past. Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's okay. I'm thinking I would defer. I don't know if anyone has a concrete part of the motion in regards to that. I would maybe defer to the forester, who is doing his job and just following the code and not trying to create any additional hardship for you. I'm stuck, I guess, on the idea of saying we should just let homeowners do whatever they want on their own land, which to a point, yes, except we do have we do have a tree board for a reason in Mequon, so I feel like I would be cautious about sort of throwing all that to the wind and saying, yep, it's your property, do whatever you want, because it impacts the neighbors, it impacts all the surrounding areas, and it impacts the city. So if we're looking at revising all that code, I guess I would be interested to hear more about that, because a lot of tree issues come forward in front of us.
Mayor.
But for tonight, I would vote in favor of a waiver for the, I think it's a clear hardship that's been demonstrated, and I agree that you should be allowed to build your garage, for heaven's sake.
Thank you.
Okay. No, I don't think any revisions to the tree ordinance would go that far. It's a couple of hardships that have come forward to us where, you know, the tree eventually grew into the house and was destroying the house and had to be removed. Or in this case, he got approval to build a garage and the tree's in the way, and somebody should have thought of that a long time ago. And if somebody designs a property from scratch and there's trees on it, they try to avoid the trees. That's what the tree ordinance is designed to do. But in this case, I agree. I think a waiver is justified.
By the way, that was my point. It's not that you just should cut down trees, you know.
I would just say in defense of the process, I mean, there is a chicken and egg situation there, whether we charge people for the specimen tree inspection as part of our architectural review board fees. We don't charge it if they want to go for a variance. If we did that up front, I think we'd get a lot of critique for charging someone for a tree inspection on a variance that they may or may not get. So there is a process in place, and the Board of Appeals process would take precedent and go prior to the tree inspection, which is part of the architectural review board, which comes later. So cases like this will come up. Unless we decide to send somebody out there and charge them as part of their Board of Appeals application, that would be the only way we would have caught this earlier in the process. So.
Wait, can you say that, so as part of the architectural review process, there's a fee that's assessed related to
There's a
the
fee
tree?
that incorporates the tree inspection that
Okay.
pays for the forester's time to go to the property. And that's assessed when you come forward for your architectural review board application. So that's done later on in the process than Board of Appeals. We don't send someone through architectural review board until they
They've gone and gotten approval.
Yeah,
through
because
the
if they
Board
don't
of
get the
Appeals.
variance, then there's no point of going through the architectural review
Yep.
board, so. Just a side note.
Don't they? No, it's irrelevant. Okay. Any other comments? We have motion and second to grant the waiver. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Waiver has been granted.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck to you.
Thanks.
Item D, Chapter 58 of the zoning code as it relates to the LTD zoning district.
The next two items are somewhat related to one another. This first request is to change the LTD zoning district, a text amendment. This is being sponsored by the owner of Lexington Square, who recently purchased the property. He has a potential tenant that does smoothie bars and would like them to move into the building, but it's not permitted under the LTD overlay. So he's requesting that that type of use be allowed as a conditional use in the zone. There's only two properties in the city that have the LTD zoning, and this is one of them. When staff looked at the request, we did kind of look a little bit at our list of conditional uses. While I think the intent is good that the LTD district is about specific uses versus some of our other zoning classifications which are more broad-based, we felt the smoothie bar may be too narrowly defined, so we looked at different resources, and the NAICS, which is a classification system that's used across the country, had a category called snack and alcoholic beverage bars, non-alcoholic beverage bars, which incorporates the smoothies as well as the bakery and bagel shops, which are already permitted, as well as ice cream shops, things like that. So we felt that it would be more appropriate to use that definition in the code, and then that would prevent us from having to come back if there's another specific request to that use. We don't feel like by having that category, we're going to allow some uses in there that we don't want to see. So we are supportive of the text amendment. Again, this will be a conditional use grant, so they would still have to come back in front of the Planning Commission to get approval for the conditional use grant. Again, this is also related to the next item on your list as well, so we'll talk about that after any discussion on this item.
I move to recommend it to the council.
A motion,
Second.
motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Jack, what's the other property that's affected?
There's a property about 60 West Mequon Road. I think it's the former Hodorowski property. It's basically across the street from the reserve of Mequon, the apartment complex. It's not really being used as a commercial. I'm not sure why that property has the LTD on it, but there hasn't been any activity on that piece since I've been here, so.
Yeah, I think so. Does our code anywhere incorporate the NAICS definitions?
No, that's a good thought, though. I think we're gonna maybe look at adding that somewhere as a reference. I didn't have a chance to do that as part of this process, but we can have that entered going forward. I think we should, in the future, we're talking about, again, some major changes to the zoning code to kind of address some of these issues, and I think that would be an appropriate reference, because it does have specific definitions of types of uses in
And I
there.
really think it ought to, because I wouldn't have thought of a bagel shop as being a snack bar.
Yes, right.
Yeah, that's what we're getting rid of bagel
Right.
shops.
If you want to add that as a recommendation, I can probably get that prepared for the council, for the ordinance, because this will come in front of the council for public hearing in September. So I think we can add that somewhere in the code. I'm not sure exactly where it will be best to put it, but we can add that as language.
Is that whoever seconded, is that a friendly amendment? Okay, I'd like to have, some sort of language that wherever the NAICS defines terms that are used in our zoning code, the terms in our zoning code will have that meaning or something like that.
Sure, yeah, we can work on that, that's fine.
Okay. Any further discussion? Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is recommended. That change to zoning code is recommended. Moving on to item C, Jim Forrester. Applicant is seeking rezoning ordinance amendment approval to allow changes to the conditions of the PUD ordinance related to the hours of operation and location of conditional uses for property located at 11649 North Port Washington Road.
Yes, this is also specific to this customer. The applicant that is looking at the smoothie shop is looking to go on the south elevation of the building. There were two amendments to the original PUD for this development, and one of the conditions is that no customer access or signage shall be allowed of the south elevation of the building for LTD uses. I think that goes back to the original approved site plan that showed an access road coming in off that building to Eastbrook Drive. And I think a lot of the residents from the homeowners association to the west objected to that because of traffic onto that road. A subsequent ordinance, 97, in 1997, eliminated that road and allowed for another access point off Port Washington Road. So because of that, I don't necessarily think that restriction on customer access or signage on that elevation really has much of an impact on the neighboring development. Also, in the 20-plus years since that has been approved, there's a significant tree line along that elevation that it makes it almost difficult to see the building. I did put a picture in the packet for you to show you kind of what that tree line looks like. So I think by changing that requirement, it would allow, and this is the south elevation of the building, it would allow LTD uses to go in the building along this elevation. The second portion of that was a requirement, and I would confess to say that I didn't know it existed, that the hours of operation in the LTD zone were allowed to be between 9 to 5, but only for a maximum of 5 hours. And that is only specific to the LTD zone. So if you are a B3 zone building there and you are a tenant in there and you want to be open Sunday, you had no restrictions on limits. But if you were an LTD user, you could be open from 9 to 5 on a Sunday, but only for 5 hours in that time frame. And it's obviously a very difficult thing to enforce. And I don't necessarily see the impact of allowing someone to be open from 9 to 5 on Sundays. I think I went back in the history and I think I found that there's 3 LTD uses that were in this building at one time. There's currently none. And all 3 of those uses actually did not have Sunday hours. So this applicant sounds like they will be open on Sunday and would prefer to be open for more than that 5-hour time frame, which again, if it's between the 9 and 5, I don't see an objection to it as being an impact on the surrounding properties. So we're supportive of the amendment to the ordinance. Again, this is a zoning ordinance, so that will go to Common Council for a public hearing in September. I know there was a couple of the neighbors from Eastbrook that had contacted me, and most of their concerns had to do actually with a potential phase 2 or 3, as you would call it, behind this building. And I basically made the comment that I haven't heard anything with regard to a plan for that, and it's not on this agenda, or it won't be on the agenda when the council takes action in September. So we do recommend approval based on the conditions. Thanks.
Okay, we have one person who registered to speak, Jim Havlicek. Do you wish to speak?
My only question here was, I was just referenced to years ago as far as development of eating establishments or whatever on this side, and I know there have been some changes to that, obviously with the Taco Bell and Jimmy John's and all those. What more might there be? Might there be Seattle's Best, Collectivos, you know, whatever might more there be
In the LTD zoning district?
in that particular district? Right here, the picture I'm looking at.
Well, there's a list of 29 things that can go in the LTD district.
Okay, in this particular district, this particular setting.
Any one of them could go in this building, although it's unlikely you'll get many, if any of them. The request tonight is for the smoothie shop,
Okay, so that.
which we
that-
define now as a
Certain-
snack and non-alcoholic.
We don't have an answer then, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you could have a weight loss store. Now, I'm not sure what that is, a weight loss store.
Not a smoothie store.
But it's not a fitness center, because that would be a weight loss store. But, yeah, formal wear store?
No, with all due respect, I'm just asking, as I said, as I look
All
at
kinds of-
that and I know where this is, what other might there be? So, that's
They're all
all I.
low-intensity retail uses, florist, stuff like that. There's a whole list. You can have the list if you want.
Okay, no, thank you. You've answered.
And that list has existed for a long time. It's
Since
nothing new.
1995.
Right.
Or something like that.
Excuse me, I'm with Jim,
Uh-huh.
who just spoke, and I'm with the Eastbrook Condominium Association. We're concerned more with what's going to happen in the future with all of this in the back section. We understand that it was all purchased, the entire area was purchased, and to be honest with you, I can't understand somebody buying something without the idea of building something in the back. Now, I know that hasn't come up tonight, but our association, we have 30 families sitting right on top of that, and we are concerned of what goes in there, and we want to talk about it further, and we would like more information regarding all of this. Thank you.
Alderman Worth?
Well, the uses that we are talking about tonight are all conditional uses, so they need individual approval. They're not something that somebody has the right to put in, without a public hearing and the opportunity for people to comment. So
If
they're
there's
not-
a phase 3, this is 1 and 2, I
right.
believe.
So if you could let me,
Sure.
the phase 3, if it ever happens.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm not sure people are going to put a retail use behind an office building. That would be pretty darn weird.
I agree.
If you look at condition 3 of the ordinance, I put it in your packet, it says there shall be no retail uses, including B3 district retail uses allowed in phase 3 of this development. So that back portion is restricted to office only. It even is more restrictive than the front because it doesn't allow any retail. It basically limited the B3 and the LTD in the back to just restricted just the office use only. So if there's a building built in the back, unless the ordinance changes, it's restricted to office use only at this
But
time.
I was also talking about just practically. I'm not sure anybody
Yeah.
would ever request to put a bagel shop behind an office building. It doesn't make any sense. But the ordinance would prohibit them from doing that also. Now, but they do what rights do they have to build phase 3?
They were approved, the PUD approved the building. It did say, though, if it wasn't completed within 70 months, they have to comply with current zoning standards. So they would still have to come back. There was a site plan that showed 2 buildings back there, I believe. No stormwater, things like that. So stormwater would have to be addressed, lighting, landscaping, things like that. So they would all have to come back through the building and site plan approval. But from my review of the ordinance, it does look like the PUD granted them the ability to have those buildings in the back.
So they might not be able to build them anyhow if they have to build stormwater facilities and do other things. That's not really before us. The question is, does it make sense to allow a smoothie store on that south elevation that effectively faces the Taco Bell building, right?
Yep, that's basically what we have in front of us tonight.
You have, I think it's 20 or 25 types of businesses listed. And apparently retail is not allowed for the Phase 3. Well, if you had no retail in the 1 and 2, but yet if you change that to include, I think you had a bridal shop and a camera shop and all of that kind, that's a retail shop. So how do you differentiate retail to retail? I mean, that's retail.
But that's not allowed in Phase 3 under the current ordinance, so.
But if the ordinance changes,
But that would be something we would address at another time, and the council would have to weigh that decision, and my guess is it would be a very difficult thing for them to overturn because of the past precedent that they set years ago. But that's not in front of us tonight. And the way it sits right now, they're not allowed any retail back in that building if it does get built.
And we have no way to hamstring a common council that might occur, be in place 10 years from now. They could put in a water park there for all we can.
Right.
We can't do anything about that. But right now, what's before us is this one use in this one location. And the hours. And nobody's going to put a water park there. Nobody's going to put a fast food restaurant there. It makes no sense from a business perspective, and I can't imagine any council ever approving that. But,
you never know.
Now the law is they
Never
can't
know.
put it there.
Okay.
Could you leave your name for the record, sir?
Sure. My name is Bernie Burson. I'm the elected president of the association, and I represent 30 families.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
If I could just, I'm Steve Richmond, I'm also on the board of the association. I think you can appreciate our concern because we appeared here in connection with the whole Taco Bell shopping area, and there was a rezoning in connection with that, which we didn't notice the notification, and now our antenna is up a bit more than it was before, and we want to make sure that while we don't object to the smoothie shop at all, we saw, this additional language appearing, not just the smoothie shop, but there are a bunch of other uses which we don't necessarily totally understand, including snack bars and, I think it says something about coffee shops or something like that. What's to prevent a Starbucks? What's to prevent other types of uses? And I guess before the public hearing, we'll just try to do our homework and just make sure we understand what is meant by that language, even if it is in a standard type of language that was been available to the planner. But I think we do have concerns. We just want to continue to look at if you had just said a smoothie shop or a smoothie bar, it was just selling smoothies. We have no problem with that. We don't have problems with the signage as long as it's just for that building. But we just want to make sure that we aren't opening a Pandora's box here. So that's the reason for our appearance and our concern. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
Can we just summarize it? I think you guys have Taco Bell PTSD a little bit. Yeah? I get it. I understand. So I think just to make sure we're all clear, all we're talking about tonight is this specific use. The list that the mayor offered you lists anything that would possibly be able to be used in that building, the existing buildings, But any of those individual applicants would have to come forward to this commission, and you would have opportunity to hear what they have to say, and it would have to be approved individually. So you can't just come forward and say, I'm going to put in Starbucks. Starbucks would have to come forward and say, we want to put a Starbucks in this building. For the other two buildings that you're worried about, as Jack noted, the way it states right now, there is no retail allowed there. And Alderman Worth noted that we can't project, you want assurance that as long as you live there, you're not going to have to worry about this. And that's not something that this commission can provide. I understand wanting it. But what we can tell you right now is that the way that it's laid out, there wouldn't be any retail in those buildings, should they even be able to be built. So I think that's as much as can be assured you tonight. That's kind of the summary of it. And then we have to vote specifically on fresh and allowing these exceptions or these additions, changes to the LTD.
Also in a zoning that wouldn't allow drive-throughs, correct?
Well, again, that would be through the conditional use process. I don't see how you would even probably do a drive-through in this building, so I don't see someone looking at that. But that could be a condition of approval of any use in there, that it doesn't have a drive-through as it's a legitimate condition to make, but I just don't see that being an issue on this building.
That other building has a different zoning code.
Different zoning category.
Yeah, it's a different,
Yeah.
it's a different
B2.
zoning
B2.
class.
It's B2.
This is supposed to be office with maybe a little retail. That's why it's limited. Okay, any further comments?
Move approval?
Second?
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Next meeting is August 7th, 2 weeks.
Yes, unfortunately, we were trying to accommodate another meeting to handle some of the overload from today, and now that meeting looks like it'll be a lot more beefy than this meeting, so sorry for no break for August, but maybe.
Last month you told us no August meeting.
You lied. Liars. I do need the break, but not after.
Second, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.